everyone. Again, good to be in the Lord's house. I want to turn to the book of John, chapter 4. In this chapter, through verse 42, we see Jesus in Samaria. In the account of Jesus saving a woman of Samaria. It is an example of Jesus crossing social barriers, racial barriers, and prejudices. And he speaks to this woman of Samaria, and he saves her soul. And not only so, but other Samaritans were saved as well, as we read in verses 41 and 42. And he dwelt in Samaria for 2 days. John is the only gospel writer to record this event. The account divides itself basically into 3 sections. Verses 1 through 4, there's the occasion of the account. Verses 5 through 26, there's a conversation between Jesus and this Samaritan woman. And then in verses 27 through 42, there's the record of the results of this conversation between Jesus and this woman of Samaria. And then the account closes in verse 43 with Jesus leaving Samaria after 2 days and heading into Galilee. It's been a couple years since we've preached from this text. It's one of my favorites. We'll read John chapter 4, verses 7 through verse 29. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, Give me, he calls attention to himself, give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away into the city to buy meat. Then said the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou being a Jew, so she recognizes him, he's a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Jesus answered and said unto her, If thou knewest, we preached on this verse a couple weeks ago, the gift of God and who it is that saith to thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldest have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. The woman said unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence then hast thou that living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us this well, and drank thereof himself, and his children, and his cattle? Jesus answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water, pointing to the well, shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well springing up into everlasting life. The woman said unto him, Sir, give me this water, that I thirst not, neither come hither to draw. Jesus saith unto her, Go call thy husband, and come hither. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said unto her, Thou hast well said, I have no husband. For thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband. In that sayest thou truly. The woman said unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. She's under conviction of sin now. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Jesus said unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh, when ye shall neither in this mountain, nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. Ye worship, ye know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. The woman said unto him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is Christ. When he is come, he will tell us all things. Jesus said unto her, I that speak unto thee am he. I am the Christ. I am the Messiah. I am the one the Old Testament spoke of. And upon this came the disciples. Remember, they'd gone out into the city to buy meat, and marveled that he talked with the woman. And yet no man said, What seekest thou? Or why talkest thou with her? The woman then left her water pot, and went her way into the city, and saith to the men, Come see a man, which told me all things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? So what we have here is more than a conversation between Jesus and this woman of Samaria. It is the record of Jesus saving the soul of this Samaritan woman. It is an example, it is an illustration of the amazing grace of God. The absolute sovereignty of God in saving sinners. The willingness of Christ to save and receive sinners of all backgrounds. It's also the display of the Lord's amazing love, His mercy, His grace. So, it is also in this account that we see the wonderful change that salvation brings to the sinner's life. So what is recorded here illustrates the wonderful truth of Isaiah 65:1. I am found of them that sought me not. This woman wasn't seeking Jesus when she came to that well. She didn't even know who he was when she got there. I am found of them that sought me not. And besides the beautiful picture of the salvation experience, there are many lessons here in personal evangelism. There are the lesson of the priceless excellence of Christ that He gives compared to the temporal. Again, the bulk of the chapter speaks of the salvation experience of this Samaritan woman. But it's not our intent this morning to view it in regard to her salvation experience. But we want to speak to those who are saved, with the emphasis being the importance of you and I meeting with Jesus every day, so that we do not get bogged down with the temporal things of life. With that in mind, notice verse 7. There cometh a woman of Samaria. What she's coming for is to draw water. And in verse 28, the woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city. That does not equate with verse 7. In verse 29, we hear her, Come see a man. Is not this the Christ? There's been a transformation concerning the temporal and Christ. She left her water pot. She came to draw water. She left her water pot. And then she went declaring, Is not this, come see a man. Is not this the Christ? So our subject this morning is getting beyond the water pots to Christ. We all deal with the temporal. Deal with it every day. Nothing wrong with that. That's life. But we can't get stuck there. And that's what this message is about. So let's look at the statements of the text. In verse 6, there's Jesus. and he's sitting on a well. We're told it's about noon, the 6th hour. And he's there for this woman of Samaria. And it's stated in verse 7, there cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. She's a desperately needy soul. She needs the life that only He can give. She needs the pardon. She needs the justification. She needs the cleansing. She needs the reconciliation. She needs the freedom that only He can give. She needs the acceptance that can only be found in Him. There He is at the well, and here she comes. But that's not the reason she's coming. She's not coming to meet Him. She's not coming to be saved in her mind. She has no idea that He's at the well. The reason for coming is clearly stated: to draw water. That's why she's coming. That's not a statement of condemnation. It's a statement of fact. She is coming to draw water. Nothing wrong with that. She needs water. And it is her intention, it is her focus to get water. Her state of mind, her objective, her ambition, her desire, her priority at this time is to get water. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. So here she comes. She's carrying her water pot to Jacob's well to draw water. This is her routine. This is her regiment. This is her habit. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. This was part of her life. Nothing wrong with any of it. That's life. This is what she ordinarily did. What she's doing is essential to daily life. And it is a picture of the temporal. It is a picture of the duties and the responsibilities and the tasks of everyday life. Nothing wrong with those things. They're necessary. But it's stated in verse 28, the woman then left her water pot. She came to draw water, and she left her water pot and went her way into the city. Again, it's very plainly stated. She came to draw water. And this makes the statement that she left her water pot very curious. And it's something out of the ordinary. It is a statement, she left her water pot. That should give rise to many questions. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water, but she left her water pot and went her way into the city. Those two statements by themselves do not equate without an explanation. Something had to happen between she came to draw water and she left her water pot and went into the city without her water pot. Those two statements need explanation. Something extraordinary had to happen between those two statements. This woman, again, she came with her water pot. She has one thing on her mind: to get water. And the fact that she left her water pot and returned to the city It makes this a very significant statement. It's a very noteworthy feature of what transpired that day at the well. Most people read this account, and very few even give attention to she left her water pot. But that's a very significant statement, especially when you consider verse 7, she came to draw water. So that's very, very unusual. So you have two facts stated. She came to draw water, and she left her water pot. Those two facts do not align reasonably. They indicate something's happened. An interruption must have occurred. A change has taken place. It was her routine to carry her water pot to the well and draw water, and to carry it back home. That was her routine. So the fact that she left her water pot and returned home without water, her ordinary and her routine has been interrupted. Something has happened. In reading the account, again, we cannot pass over this statement. She left her water pot. You cannot pass over that as something trivial. You can't pass over that without giving it some thought and some consideration, because it's a remarkable statement. Water, of course, was extremely valuable commodity. The very fabric of life. You had to have water to live. Someone had to carry it to the house. And the water pot was the means of doing so. Therefore, the water pot was an absolute essential and a part of everyday life. The water pot's very important. It may not mean much to you and I today, but back then, it was essential. It serves as a picture, the water pot, of the temporal. The duties, the responsibilities, the tasks of everyday life. Again, nothing wrong with any of that. The woman then left her water pot. This is indicative of the fact that there has been a change in her perspective. Something has changed. She went to draw water. That was her mindset. That was her focus. But she leaves the water pot. Her perspective, her focus has changed. Something drastic has happened. In verse 28, the woman, the very same woman who carried the water pot to the well to draw water, left her water pot. There's been a change in her intent. There's been a change in her routine. The woman then left her water pot. Reveals that the water in Jacob's well was no longer her first interest. It was no longer her first concern. There's been a change in what really matters. We get stuck in the daily routines of life, the daily duties of life. Sometimes the Lord causes something to happen in our life that causes us to see what's really important and what isn't. And I believe that's what happened here. Again, we see her, she's carrying the water pot to Jacob's well to draw water. And then we see her leaving Jacob's well. without her water pot. There's been a change. There's been a change in the relative position of the water pot. Not only did she leave the water pot, but she's living a different life. Notice, she left her water pot, went her way into the city, and saith to the men, Come see a man. Picture her. Picture the animation upon her face as she goes through the city streets. Come see a man. And I believe her facial expression is quite different from her facial expressions on her way to the well to draw water. Her life is different. It's different. Hear her. The excitement in her voice as she says, Come see a man. Again, when she went to draw water, there wasn't anything exciting about it. She did that every day. It was her routine. Come see a man. So we see her and we hear her, and her mind is no longer on the temporal things of life. Her mind is no longer on that water pot. Something else has captivated her attention. Christ has captivated her heart and her mind. She had come with her water pot to draw water, but she left her water pot and went her way into the city. A radical change has taken place in her life. There has been a change in her plans. Her plan was to get the water, to carry the water back to the house. There's been a change in her plans. There's been a change in her values. That water pot was so important and essential to daily life, but she left it. Her outlook upon water pots has changed. There's been a change in her interest. There's been a change in what matters most. Again, she left her water pot. I don't believe she left it permanently. Life has to go on. There are earthly duties. But the relative position and the relative importance of the water pot has changed. She left her water pot. Her life is no longer dominated by the temporal. Her life is no longer dominated by the mundane and the ordinary. We have this very destructive and enslaving tendency to get bogged down, to get mired, to get stuck, to get entangled, to get overwhelmed with the temporal duties of life. And we allow water pots, if you will, to dominate and to control our lives. But there are some principles laid down in what happened between this Samaritan woman and Christ that I believe will keep us from getting bogged down and getting mired and entangled in the temporal affairs of life. Again, don't misunderstand me. The temporal affairs must go on. We have responsibilities. But there's more to life than getting entangled in those things. So let's consider some daily essentials that will keep us from being bogged down with water pots. Again, verse 7, there's this statement. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. And in verse 28, the woman then left her water pot. And then verses 28 and 29, with her water pot at the well, she went her way into the city and saith to the men, Come see a man. Is not this the Christ? And it is what happened between verses 7 and verses 28 and 29 that explains verses 28 and 29. If you were to come to a well in those days, you approach the well, and there is a water pot sitting there. Nobody's around. You would probably, well, first of all, you'd probably look around. There's got to be somebody here. Seeing nobody, you would probably assume something must be wrong with that water pot. Must be cracked. Must have a hole in it. This is a perfectly good water pot. And as you begin to examine the water pot, there are no cracks. There's no hole. Immediately you would ask yourself, why would someone leave a perfectly good water pot at a well? Why would they do that? You do not just leave a usable water pot at the well. Something must have happened. And then your mind would go in all kinds of directions. Again, what happened that day at the well caused this woman to leave her water pot. And it is a vivid picture of what happened to you and I when the Lord saved us. And it is also a picture of what needs to happen on a daily basis so that we have a right correlation between water pots and Christ, between the temporal and the spiritual. So let's see what happened, and this needs to happen every day to you and I. There was a personal meeting with Christ. What brought about this change of purpose and plans and focus and her state of mind and her ambition and her desire and her priority and her perspective upon water pots was a personal meeting with Jesus Christ. That's what changed everything. She came under the transforming power of Christ. When you and I have a personal meeting with Christ, where we come under the transforming power of Him, that will keep the water pots in the right perspective. All the time. Every time. Secondly, she personally heard His voice. Verse 7, Jesus saith unto her. No one else was around. It was just Him and her. He spoke directly to her. And His first two words were, give me. Give me. We need to personally hear Him every day. Every day we need to hear Him say, give me. Give me. She did not have to wonder if He was talking to her. It was just the two of them there. There's no doubt. He's speaking to her. And every day, we need to hear Him say to us individually, give me. And without any doubt in our mind, no, He's speaking to me. So we need to meet Him, and we need to hear Him. That keeps water pots and Christ in perspective. Thirdly, her attention was directed toward Christ. Verse 7, Jesus said unto her, give me to drink. She had come to draw water, and had not her attention been diverted by Him, what would have happened? She would have drawn water, and she would have been on her way home. Perhaps wondering, I wonder who that man was at the well that day. But there was an interruption. Her attention has been diverted. Her attention has been drawn to Christ. That needs to happen every day. Every day we need to have our attention directed to Him. And that keeps water pots in their proper place. In Christ. Fourthly, He revealed to her that she was a needy soul. And that He had what she needed. We see that in verse 10, verse 13, and verse 14. Lest we go mindlessly through the day, and let's face it, that's how many people are with their temporal affairs. You become so accustomed to it, you just go through it mindlessly. Lest we do that, we need every single day to be reminded, I'm a needy soul. I'm a needy soul. And He has everything I need. That's what He was telling her. He was saying, you have so many needs. And I'm everything you need. You see, when you realize that, that water pot's not near as important as it once was. Fifthly, Christ spoke of eternal blessings. Again, verse 10, verse 13, 14. We're not going to read those verses to save time, but I encourage you to do so. He reminded her in those verses of the unsatisfying nature of earthly things. Lest we get things in the wrong order. And we do it all the time. We need to be reminded every day. Need to be reminded every day. Lest we get things in the wrong order. Jesus declared in those verses where real satisfaction of soul could be found. And lest we pursue the wrong things, we need to be reminded, I have many needs, and He is and He has everything I need. That keeps things in perspective. It's when we forget those things that water pots take priority over spiritual matters. And lastly, He revealed Himself to her. Notice verse 26. Jesus said unto her, I that speak unto thee am. When He said that, He stood revealed to her. Jesus said unto her, no one else was there. It's personal. And what did He say? I am. I am. Now that must be viewed in relation to the words of verse 25. The woman said unto Him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is called Christ. When He is come, He will tell us all things. And Jesus said, I am. I am the Messiah. I am Christ. I am the one that the Old Testament prophesied of. She now has a perception of who He is. She sees something of His magnificence and His glory. We need this every day. Jesus said unto her, I am. He was revealed and known to her. I believe this is when Jesus saved her, right here. I am. Jesus said unto her, I am. She has personally met and she has experienced the one who has precedence over all. That needs to happen every day. And notice, the woman then left her water pot. And now uppermost in her mind is not the water pot. The water pot still has an importance. It has a place. But it's no longer the most important. The water pot is no longer uppermost in her mind. What's uppermost in her mind is Christ. And she goes into the city shouting, come see a man! Come see a man! Due to what happened that day at the well, her perception has changed. I that speak unto thee am. The woman left her water pot. You see, it's our perception of Christ that determines our perception of everyday things of life. If a child of God is always giving priority to the earthly over Christ, they do not have a clear perception of Christ. Because if they did, priorities just fall in place then. That's the problem. Well, Pastor, pray that they'll cut my hours at work so I have more time to serve the Lord. That's not the problem. The problem is a lack of perception of who He is. That's how things got out of whack. It's our perception of Him that determines how we live our life. It is our perception of Christ that determines priorities. It is our perception of Christ that dictates the relative position of the water pot. The water pot must have a relative position to Christ. Now notice in verse 9, then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, how is it that thou being a Jew? So when she goes to the well, he speaks to her. She could tell immediately, this is a Jewish man. This is a Jewish man. So when she got to the well, what did she see? She saw a Jew. That's all she saw. He's just a Jewish man. But now, verse 29, come see a man, is not this the Christ? She's moved from thou being a Jew to Him being the Christ. And now, her life is not lived in relation to water pots. Her life is lived in relation to Christ. And she has a passion. And she has a resolve for Christ. Every day we need to meet this one. Every day we need to meet the one who saved our soul. We need to meet with Him. And I promise you, if you don't, the temporal will be put ahead of Him. It'll happen. Mark it down. And if that's happened, that's the reason. There's been a failure to meet with Him and to hear Him. Again, water pots are necessary. But we do not live our lives confined to water pots. We live our lives in relation to Christ. Much of the temporal, not all of it. We bring a lot of temporal things into our lives that are not absolutely necessary. But much of the temporal is absolutely necessary. But we're not to live in relation to the temporal, but we're to live in relation to Christ. So in closing, as children of God, we don't have to be controlled and weighted down by the water pots of life. And if you are controlled and weighted down by the water pots of life, you need to be honest with yourself. How'd I get here? It's the not doing of everything we've mentioned. Because this depends upon our perception of Christ. This world has a very powerful draining effect upon spirituality. But we don't have to fall prey to that. And I'll tell you why. Because just as there was one at the well for this Samaritan woman, there is one who's there for you and I as well. And He can do for us what He did for her. And it made a difference in her life. I picture her. I don't picture her skipping merrily along on her way to the well with the water pot to get water. I picture her just going through the everyday affairs of life. But I believe she went back into the city a different way than when she went to that well. She has a song in her heart. Everything has changed. And you and I can live life filled with the praise and assurance that only Jesus can give. Yes, we have temporal duties, we have temporal responsibilities, and we're to be faithful in those things. We're not to be irresponsible. But we can do those things praising Him because we've seen Him. So we need to ask ourselves, what is our identity in life? Water pots or Christ? What is more of an accurate picture of our lives? Verse 7, she came to draw water, or verses 28 and 29. She left her water pot, went into the city, come see a man. She's saying, folks, you've got to see this man. She didn't say, come see a Jew. Come see a man. Is not this the Christ? Everything has changed. Her whole life has changed. That's what salvation does. But again, this needs to be our daily experience. And our life will be different. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us